Hi everybody. So today I'll be talking about insights on demand, how research virtualization puts data at your fingertips. So I've broken the presentation out into two parts. The first will talk about the current state, and the second will talk about the future state. So before I get into the current state, just a quick little story. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Amazon Go, and it's Amazon's attempt to actually disrupt the retail industry. So imagine not having to wait in lines or not having to pay with cash. So essentially, you walk into an Amazon Go, pick up the items you want, and then leave, sort of like stealing. So the way it all works, though, is it's based on a lot of interesting technology to solve this very unique problem. So when it comes down to three different core parts of technology: embedding, blending, and blurring. And I'll talk a bit about how Amazon uses them in each case. So essentially, when you walk into the Amazon store, get through a turnstile and you show it the Amazon app, the Amazon Go app. That's an example of embedding technology to solve this problem. As you go through the store, you pick up the items and put them into your basket, and you walk out. And the way it's tracking what you picked up and actually acquired is there's sensors within the store when you pick up the items. So think of the way a hotel minibar would work. And after a while, it basically watches you through cameras in terms of what's in your bag. And as you leave the store, it knows what you've bought. And as soon as you've left, you get a receipt to your Amazon account. So the blending of technology were things like the sensors and the video. The blurring is an interesting part. It's where Amazon is actually using facial recognition to look at things like how you've reacted, what you've bought, and what other things they can do with that data in the future. So it's the idea of blurring technology past this idea of just one single thing. In this case, what was for the commerce can now be for marketing. So those are the three interesting points I'm going to talk about throughout this presentation. So keep those in mind as we go through. But first, I'm going to talk a little about where the industry is as a whole. So if you think about this idea of research technology, this massive ecosystem of companies, there are a plethora of companies. Now, I've only put a smattering down on this slide, but every single day a new company starts. And what's interesting about this time versus any other time in our industry is that each company is solving for one very unique thing. Whether it's for video, transcription, AI, research automation, very unique problems they are solving for. In the old days, a lot of brands would go to a company like a Kantar or an Ipsos to solve their entire suite of problems because they'd have all these different solutions. But that's not the case as much anymore. Most brands have 5, 6, 7, 8 different companies they're working with to solve very unique problems versus one or two solving all problems. So there's been more of an opportunity for these companies to actually get into brands because of what they're doing. And because of this, it's actually changed the insights function as a whole. There's been an evolution. So more and more, a lot of companies are looking for insights professionals to actually become that business partner. Can they solve our problems past just the insights role and look at things like our sales and marketing, everything else? So really what that function should have been 20 years ago is what it's morphed into today. The problem is you have these shrinking insights teams. So you have a lot of demand to become a business partner, but you have lots of less resources to actually do it with. On top of that, companies still want to make sure there's a lot of discipline and rigor in terms of what's happening. So the world is moving fast, but they want to make sure that there is still a proper procedure in place to get this data. And even more confounding and adding more complexity to the role, they want more agility. So it's not just about the typical way we've done research forever. How can we try new and interesting things? How can we look at things like marketing and CRM and dabble in those things as well? So multi-hats, but also multi-methods. So a lot of change, which also drives down one level into what the actual role of the professional is. So now more than ever, it's about representing the customer in the boardroom. That voice is so important. It's never been harder to get a customer, never been easier to lose a customer. So someone has to talk on their behalf. That data has to represent and mean something for them. So the insights professional has never had such a stronger role before because that voice needs to be heard. As well, it's about a very evidence-based approach. For a long time, a lot of these company meetings were dominated by the loudest voice of the highest executive. Whatever they want, they would get. But more and more, it's about what's the right way to collect data to make that choice. How do we involve the consumer across that journey to get that data back? And more than ever, how can the insights professional become more of a consultant? That's what's needed in the company. How do they manage exposure? How do they give more guidance? It's not just about writing reports and doing the research, but about using it and acting on it. So that's been a massive change for the insights professional. And this is where we get back to what we kind of talked in terms of the first slide, when it comes down to this amount of companies out there, this research technology space. So you have this insights professional who's being asked by the C-level executive or directors or product people or marketing or whoever internally to do all these things. And then you have all these different companies solving very unique problems, whether it's for things like how do we talk to specific people? How do we pick the right automation platform? How do we get better video? How do we look at open ends with analytics? And how do we house all that data in one dashboard? So all these companies are offering very unique tools, but how does the insights professional actually stack them together to solve that problem? Because there are so many different things out there. And this is where we get into this idea of embedding, blurring, and blending again. And I'm embedding, this idea of seamlessly integrating research tech, super important because you want to make sure it's not bumpy. This idea of blurring, sometimes things aren't just about the research themselves, they're about marketing too. And blending, how do we take all these companies together and kind of put them in versus a traditional sense into a non-traditional sense. And I'll talk about each one as an example. So let's use embedding first. So think of the way we communicate more than ever, especially in times like now, where we use things like Zoom or WebEx to communicate with our internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. Imagine if you had the ability to, as you ended that meeting, to test an idea that you guys came up with as quickly as possible. So in this example, we mocked up a quick little M for our logo. And imagine as you finish that meeting, you could actually press that M and send out that idea or concept, and it would test it right away. You get that feedback within hours. This is this idea of seamless integration, embedding. So an easy example to showcase the utility and the speed, right? That's what embedding should really do. Now let's look at blurring. So in this example that we worked on with Manulife, essentially what we did was we created a platform to look at how people wanted to retire. But it was much more complicated than that. Essentially the marketing group, the CRM group, and the research group were all involved in this process. And as the user would log on to the Manulife website, they'd be asked how they want to retire. And they'd use a Tinder-like action where they would swipe left or right based on what they wanted to do. Retire in a vineyard, on a beach, traveling, whatever that was, they would swipe. And that data is being fed into three places. The first is a CRM database, so they know more about that person and what sort of things to do with them. The second is the research group. They want to make sure the offers are the right ones, should they be changing based on the segmentation, all those different things. And they actually helped craft the discrete choice model here for the swipe itself. And the third is the marketing group. So this stuff is being fed right into the ad server. So when this person logs out of this thing, or they go on to the next page, they're being fed ads about those types of activities. So this is an all-encompassing piece of research, but you can see how it's blurring the lines between past research into different components of the company. So a good example of blurring. Now let's look at blending. A couple of examples we'll talk about. The first, if you think of marketing right now, one of the largest line items on a marketing spreadsheet typically tends to be exponential marketing. So while that's a big line item, it's very hard to measure that if you don't have the right tool sets. So we've been lucky enough to be partaking in a lot of this research, and it can never be just about our technology. You absolutely need other companies to help out. So while we would pull people from our panel, or asking Canadians panel to participate in the research, we would use Confirm It, our research technology partner for our survey programming, to use their technology to create the geofences around the different areas where those events would be. We'd actually use a company called Reality Mine to look at how we passive meter these respondents as they get into the place, to look at how they're using things like Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, all those different tools on how they're sharing about that event. And we actually piped in things like the weather network data to look at how the different temperatures or things like rain or cloud cover would impact if people went to events. Now, without being able to blend all these different technologies, we actually wouldn't get the full picture of how people were looking at events, how brand equity worked, and if they would actually buy that product, because you'd only have part of the story versus the whole entire story. So a great example of blending. A second example, and marketing attribution seems to confound the entire marketplace, so a really good example to use. So when you want to look at marketing attribution in terms of where you want to put your ads, whether it's on Facebook or TV or any other platform, you're always wondering how much I should put and what kind of money I should spend on those platforms. Now it's hard to tell if you can't really figure out when and where people are going to buy your product. In this example, we've done this for a couple of companies. We've used different technologies to solve for those problems. So whether it's Wakupa Reality Mine for the passive, Alfonso and Samba for things like tracking TV, or Cloud Factory and OurCard for receipt capture, essentially what you can do is track what people have seen online, what they've seen on TV, and if they bought something. So you can track end-to-end what they've done. Much more complicated for the respondent because you track a lot of things, but super powerful data because you can actually attest to someone seeing an ad on Facebook and on TV and then actually going to buy a product. Without blending all this tech though, you would never have that ability. So again, a great example of how this stuff works. And this really leads into what a lot of companies are thinking. A great friend of ours, Jackie Weber from Wendy's, had this quote: "We use a blend of different technologies. There is really no one mousetrap to answer all the different types of research questions that we are asked." And that's a great point. There's not one tech that's going to answer everything. The only way for companies to solve for these big, chunky research problems is to blend or blur or embed these things together, because that's the way you're going to solve it. Now this gets us into our second part, the future state of research tech. So I'm going to talk about virtualization a lot in this in terms of where the future is going. So before I get into that, let's go into an example. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this example by M&C Saatchi, but it was the first virtual poster ever created. And essentially what happens here is they ripped apart things like the call to action, the background, the font, the images, the colors, and created different versions. They put this on the side of a bus shelter and used eye tracking. And it would look at things like the different genders, different ages, and it would measure engagement. So as I would stand there and look at this ad, it would figure out that I'm a male and that I'm some sort of age, I fall in with some sort of age bracket, and it would look at how long I stood there and engage with the ad. And over a 2-week period, it actually optimized for the best version of the ad based on what it got back in the data. So a great example of AI being creative. Now they use the same technology against a creative director, sent 2 ads to Khan, and the AI actually won. So AI can be absolutely creative if we give it the right opportunity. So when it comes down to it, it comes down to how do people look at virtualization? And there's 3 basic examples we look at. The virtual interviewer, so think of the way Qual would work if you had things like a chatbot doing your interviews for you. So you can really do that stuff on scale versus having that person go into people's houses or focus groups or those types of things. Virtual people, so what if you had virtual versions of people to test against? Or virtual analysis, what if you use big AI systems to solve big problems? So I'll give a couple of examples of all these things. So let's look at our first example. Imagine if you could repurpose past data to answer future business questions. Now, this is a huge issue for a lot of companies. A good friend of ours at Mars, Michelle Gansley, had this quote: "We spend millions every year on ad hoc studies to answer a question. We often only use that study once to answer the specific business question and throw the rest away. This is why we started a new workstream called Zero Waste Research." This is a massive, massive idea. Think about the way a lot of companies work. You have research being done in continents like Asia and also in North America, and you could redo the exact same thing because you didn't know that exact piece of research was done somewhere else. So how do you solve for that problem? Here is how Mars is doing it.
Introducing Project Cricket. Different than a standard search engine, Cricket is an internal answer engine available on desktop, mobile, and voice-enabled devices.
Hey Cricket, how often do people feed dog treats to their pet?
Almost half of dog owners who buy treats say once a day.
Cricket will increase the value of our data by tenfold and increase the speed at which we are able to analyze and convert it, enabling everyone to find the answers and explore insights across all of our research data.
So a great example of how Mars is tackling the problem. So we've been lucky enough to be part of this project with another company called Knowledge Hound, but essentially they are looking to create more utility and democratization of the data. So imagine having this ability, either through your phone or through a voice-enabled device, to get that data back quickly. What's amazing about this and super powerful is it's not just about the insights and research group, it's about anyone in the company. So now you've democratized the way data is being shared, but also the function of the insights itself, which becomes super powerful. Let's move on to our next example. Imagine if you could test new ideas in real time with the virtual people. So, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the Gartner graph, but this is a good example of where technology has been going and sort of what's still to come. I circled this idea of digital twin. So this came out a while ago, but essentially it's this idea that you could create digital versions of things, whether it's your phone, a cup, your TV, this idea of digital things being online. Now, it's morphed into people as well over the last couple of years, especially around this idea of digital avatars. This is where we welcome persona panels. So persona panels basically looks at how to create digital versions of you and I. And the way it essentially works is, once you've created that version or that segmentation of audience, they shoot their digital avatar online, and it starts to consume media the way you or I would. So for my own case, it could be things like sporting sites, it could be things like politics sites, things about stocks, current events, whatever it's going to be, and it consumes that daily, and it keeps learning over and over and over again. And essentially what ends up happening is you get to have these different audiences set up, and you can sit there now with your marketing group if you're an insights professional, and you can actually type in things like the content, like what's happening here, or upload concepts or different things like that, and it'll score it automatically based on the segments you've chosen. And essentially what's happening is as you change a word or any of the words, the scoring will change because that virtual version has kept on learning every single time. And based on what it's learned today or yesterday, it keeps changing on score. What's powerful about this is that you can whittle down maybe 60 or 70 ideas into 3 or 4 really good ones very quickly, within minutes. So now you're not spending a lot of money, a pile of money on stuff that might have also taken you months. You can spend just a little bit of money and do this in 5 minutes. A very powerful tool that can be added to your toolkit when it comes down to how do you do your pre-research. So our last example, imagine if your customers could be in your boardroom with you all the time. Now, welcome Rachel. Rachel is built by Emoshape, a company that started off in the filming industry. And essentially what they did was they were looking for how do we measure opening weekends in a better way? How can we look at movies in a better way? Now, they've moved into research a little bit as well, and Rachel's basically a synthetic face built with 64 million different facial cues and structures, and she reacts to what's happening to her, whether it's being read to her or she hears something. So in this case, she's being read a Wikipedia page. But the technology is strong enough where you can add things into things like smell, or if she can even feel things like heat. So this technology is ever improving, and this idea is that you can have your consumer with you at any given time. Now, while she is super freaky, the power here is that you can kind of react and engage with your consumer whenever you need to. And this is where we think the virtual version of the boardroom is going to go. So in this example, if you take all the different tech we were showing in this webinar, you can start to look at how do you create segments of your audiences, plop them into your boardroom, and they can react to different things here. This example, we have a Wendy's digital ad there, and they're going to react to what's happening. So now there is no excuse to not have your consumers look at some of your ideas or your concepts ever, because you have such an easy way to talk to them in a virtual way. There's no excuse to ever have some sort of social media faux pas because you didn't have time to connect with your consumers. This is as fast as it's going to get. And while the world just isn't fast enough, this gives you an opportunity to kind of get there. So now you can connect in a way that maybe a year or two ago you could never do. Very powerful tools are out there for you to use. So let's look at some takeaways as we end this. 1, fast isn't fast enough. The world is moving at an incredible pace, and while there are tools that might solve for some things, virtual things can solve for others. And so now we have this ability to kind of have this massive toolkit of things we can do, and particularly around research tech, that can solve for some of these problems. Blending, blurring, and embedding are key when research tech actually works for your company. It's super important to know how to build your research tech stack and when to kind of embed, blend, and blur, because each one has a specific function. And last but not least, AI is changing the way research works, but people are still key. So we have these interesting places for virtualization. They're all based on actual people. So fundamentally, people are driving this thing. Thank you for your time. I hope you enjoyed. Take care.